in a sense, I hold myself accountable, minuscule way. I'm one person, but I remember I was teaching at New York University back in 2009. And it was during that time that I undertook a fairly extensive tour of the heartland. Uh, and with my first book, The Trouble with Islam Today.
Wait, when
And
you say heartland, you mean the American heartland?
the American heartland, excuse me, correct.
But just to be
Yeah.
clear, you live in Canada at the moment?
No, no, I
No,
live in New
I'm sorry.
York.
I
That's
have misread that.
I'm a citizen of Canada,
Ah,
but I have lived and worked in the United States for almost 15 years now. And so at this time, I was teaching at NYU, and I undertook, as I say, this tour of the American heartland with my book, my first book about the need for reform in Islam. And I was at
your first book,
various.
sorry, your first book is called The Trouble with Islam Today. Is that correct?
Correct,
All right.
correct. That's right. Um, and I speak as a Muslim in writing that book. The subtitle is A Muslim's Call for Reform in Her Faith. I was surprised, and I didn't know what to do with the fact that at various turns in that tour, I would hear the question, why do they hate us? But here's the thing, Brett. The people asking that question were not asking about why Muslims hate Americans. They were asking, why do East Coast people hate us in the heartland?
Mm.
And when I got back to NYU, I sat down with the dean of my department, and he at the time, and he asked me, so what was it like? How much Islamophobia did you have to ward off? And I said to him, none that I was able to notice. Notice he didn't say, did you encounter Islamophobia? No, how much did you encounter? Right? And that was, just such an affirmation of what I was hearing from people in the heartland, the frankly humiliation to which they've been subjected by the overly educated, who are really in so many ways undereducated, for the last 20, 30 years. And so I've long understood where, the resentment, the cultural grievance has come from. And I'm the first to say, they're not all racists. And
Oh,
the more we fall into that trap, now that the familiar ethos of a Biden-Harris administration, is back in play, the more we fall into that trap, the more we create the very thing that we say we oppose.
I agree. We are going to resurrect racism by virtue of falsely demonizing people, claiming that they have it when in fact it isn't in their minds, which doesn't mean that they don't have ignorance, right? There is ubiquitous ignorance. We are all ignorant of the experience of people who come from different places. But that ignorance, unless it is willful, doesn't cross over into what we ought to be calling racism.
Exactly. The real crime, if I may say, is not ignorance, it's incuriosity, a lack of curiosity.
Very well said. Yes, that's the thing. And the fact is, your experience that you described of A, not experiencing Islamophobia yourself as a Muslim, B, not encountering racism that the blue team swears is lurking in every white mind. This is very similar to my experience. I come from a now nearly dead tradition of left intellectuals, and as I have been rejected by people who are nominally on my side of the political spectrum, and I have traveled extensively amongst the people who are accused of racism so regularly. They're told they live in flyover states, that they're deplorable. It is amazing how infrequently one runs into anything that you would actually apply the label racism to. And it is also interesting how many of the values that in my very progressive household, the one in which I grew up, those values are now being defended by many on the center right in a way that I never expected to see.
Right.
But unless you travel across the lines that we're told you needn't bother with, you don't discover that the story about the others is just simply false.
You know, this is the great tragedy of labels. It's not the fact that labels themselves are inaccurate. After all, you can label me a Muslim and you would be right. You could label me a woman and you would be right. It's the baggage, the assumptions that go with those labels. And I'm constantly struggling with how we are going to move beyond those assumptions in a time in which we all live. We are immersed in the kinds of technologies that frankly don't incentivize the kind of thing we're doing right now, openly engaging, right? Immersed in technologies that are deliberately designed to amp up our emotions. And you're the first person to recognize this, being an evolutionary biologist. From a biological perspective, the easiest emotion to have is fear.